Good afternoon, everybody. A year ago, Jesse Peterson and I were on the stage talking about MDM development, how the spec works, and we did a demo of our open source project, which is MicroMDM. So today, I just want to go through some of the things that have changed about the project in the past year and where the project is going. So first, a little bit about me. You'll see me as @group in all the Slacks, and I mean all the Slacks. And then this is my avatar everywhere. And for those of you who don't know, this is the same thing. This is the communist version. So I only get 2 questions. I get like, what is that question? And somebody starts talking to me in Russian. So yep. And third is I'm a site reliability engineer at Collide. We built tools around OSQuery. So during the day, I manage servers and stuff. What I end up doing a lot is building servers in Go. So this talk is actually the talk about why Go is better than Swift. I think we can skip the workshop and just declare it. I'm kidding. We are going to talk about MicroMDM. So show of hands, who here has heard of MicroMDM before? Cool. And who here is using it or has tried it? Okay. In production? Okay. Cool. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't heard MicroMDM, it's an attempt at building a community-supported MDM. And there's a few things that I want to talk about today. The first one I want to talk about is the project adoption. So a little bit of project history. When it started, it was just a hobby project. There was 3 contributors. It was me, Jesse, and a guy named Mosin. You might have seen his profile documentation. And then Pepijn Brain is also a person who's been helping us kind of explore the APIs, and none of this was documented. Everything was kind of proprietary. It was just interesting for us to explore this. Nobody was using it in production. We played around with it for a few years. And then sometime about a year and a half ago, I started getting these messages of like, hey, are you still working on this project? I'm hearing some rumors from Apple about to change. It would be cool if you were playing with it. So we kind of took all the ideas we've been playing with and rewrote all the code last year, and we decided to use it to write the code for production environments. I'm kidding. This is aspirational. So we wrote the code to be user-friendly for administrators. So everything we built in mind was how would admins want to use this tool. And we really were inspired by tools like Monkey and Puppet and Chef, which were giving a declarative state to the machine, and then the tool went and enforced it. And none of the vendors were supporting that through the web interfaces that they were building. So we wanted to do something in our own. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Jesse and I presented MicroMDM here last year for the first time. Then we talked about it at Penn State Mac Admins. And then Jesse did a talk at Mac Sysadmin. So the videos, if you're curious about getting started, the videos for those are all online. After that, things kind of started snowballing. Apple started releasing documents like these. We're talking about kernel extension loading. People started using names like Magnarock and the Kexapocalypse. And this is a slide from a few days ago, but I think it's appropriate here. Current WWDC session, user approved everything. This kind of got the ball rolling on people using MicroMDM a lot. And just because Apple forced everybody to, I don't think any of us, including me, wanted to. So today, MicroMDM is used in many organizations. ranging from fleets of less than 100 to 10,000 plus max on a single server. It's also the backend for a few commercial offerings. They're doing some interesting things. Luckily, none of things that you're using to manage your Macs, but they're doing some interesting stuff. I have a stack of emails. And the channel grew. There's 480 members. I kind of stopped answering questions. Other people have jumped in, are answering questions day to day, so thank you. We went from 3 contributors for like 3 years to 14. We have over 400 issues filed. Let's say 300 something were fixed. There's still some to go. So that's the project today. And that's kind of like the adoption curve for the project. So I'm kind of excited. I had a few slides here, but I decided to delete them, but I'll mention them anyway. Kind of the not exciting thing is that I have a job which is not writing MicroMDM, and I spent less time this year writing code than I did last year on this project. That's not to say that I'm not going to maintain it, but we need to get this number up higher. So one of the things that I do in my free time is I help people learn how to write Go so they can contribute to this project. So if you want to DM me on Slack and say, I want this feature, we can talk about how we can build it together, and then you can go build the next one together. The other thing that kind of came out as really cool, surprising to me, is we got a website redesign. And the reason I say it's surprising to me is because I didn't build this. My coworkers at Collide surprised me and contributed this, and I saw it in a pull request. So that's really nice. Thank you to Jason and Fritz for doing this. We have a blog post. There's a bunch of different blogs. As Apple keeps changing things, we'll keep writing about them. So yeah, new features. So actually this is talk about all the new things. So here's kind of like a changelog of what we have. And one of the things that I did recently is I went through the specification and I updated all the commands that were supported. So initially, I cared only about a few because I wanted to just get Monkey onto my system and kind of be done. Apple has a whole range of them, so it's all just XML files, so it's a matter of checking that all the keys are there. So we did that, and now all the iOS keys are supported and things like that. You can use the API. Pretty much anything. There's a few things in 10.14 I'm going to hopefully show you later. The other thing Jesse just contributed is auto-assignment for the EP enrollments. So what I mean here is MicroMDM has this concept of a blueprint, where like when a new Mac enrolls, you say, you want Monkey on it, you want this profile, and such and such. So before this, people had to use the API to assign the EP profiles to any new serial numbers that were added to the EP so that they would know to go here. And now there's a check where like you can automatically do this. We're also working on adding some custom filters there, so you can do a different one for iOS and a different one for like a specific model. One of the other things that I'm kind of excited about is unenrollment. So we keep talking about how MDM, you enroll it, the profile is not removable. Like, how do you deal with that? MicroMDM has a button API command where you can go and you can block that device from enrolling, just check out. And then the other thing I added is user-level payloads. These are not for Active Directory and things like that, but during the DEP step, you can choose to install an admin account. And so those work. Those can be added to that blueprint I mentioned earlier. And that's in the account configuration. And and then the other thing is cleaned up the documentation, improved the setup workflow. There's a new subcommand for going in and dealing with all the Apple certificates that you need. And then the final thing is webhook support. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I don't work that much on this project. Certainly not as much as Apple. would like me to, or would like any MDM developer to work on their MDM, there can only be one MDM for your devices. But you need to do everything through it. So there's email configuration, there's TV ratings, there's all sorts of things that I don't really want to deal with. Alistair wants 2 keys in a lock. So came up with this feature kind of idea of separating what the core project is, which deals with device authentication, things like that, and workflows. And workflows are things that are going to use the core APIs to build something higher level. And the idea that in the future, you'll just build one yourself. And yeah, that can be in a different repo or anything. But we're starting with building a few examples in the main repo. And so I have a few workflows that I want to show. The most important one, I think the one that's been developed the most, is Webhooks. So the way MicroMDM works, if you saw the talk last year, is that, well, the way MDM works in general is that the device will send you some plist, and you're supposed to read it, take a look at it, decide to possibly send another plist back. Device reads it, decides what to do based on the contents of the plist. So MicroMDM takes a plist and puts it on a message bus, message queue, and all the internal systems work that way. What we did this year is that we exposed all of these responses from the device to go to a configurable webhook. So that means that you don't have to write Go, you can write Swift, and you can accept your, if you write a server in Swift, you can accept all these webhooks, do something with them, write a reply back to MicroMDM, and basically build anything higher level that you need. So when I mean that MicroMDM will send you everything, I really mean everything. So this is what a webhook looks like. You'll get a post request to whatever URL you configure, and it'll just be a JSON blob. The important keys, there's a topic. So the most common one is this connect topic, and this is where an enrolled device sends all its data to. There's an event ID, which is unique for each event, when it was created, and then this, you have an acknowledged event is that commands that are acknowledged go here, and so you'll see a status. There's also a failed status there that's possible, and you see the command UID. So every time you set up any command to MDM, like installing a profile, installing an application, wiping a device or whatever, there will be this UID string specific to that command. So if you're tracking that, when you want to get it back, you just need to track that it was acknowledged, and that means that the device acted on it, maybe. It really depends, UDP management. One of the things that I added is this idea of a URL params. So in your enrollment profile, we don't do anything with it, which is why it's null. But if you write your own, you can add any URL parameters to that enrollment URL that the device is going to use. So you can do some interesting things there. And MicroMDM will forward those to your webhooks. So if you want to do some sort of extra association between devices and events, you can use those URL params. And the last one, which is the most important key, is this raw payload key. So what that looks like is it's actually a base64 encoded plist that the device sends. So this is the actual raw thing that MicroMDM receives. We sometimes use it for ourselves, but most of the time we're just going to forward it. So this is what it looks inside. So if you take this and you pipe that raw payload into base64 and decode it, you just get this plist. And in this case, the plist just says the command was acknowledged, not really an important one. In this case, I sent a profile list command. So I got back a list of profiles on my device. And this is very long, but it basically has all the profiles on that device all the keys and things like that. So you can actually check and see if there's a profile installed by a user coming from another source or anything like that. And that's kind of neat. And that's kind of what I want to talk about is the second workflow, which is managing profiles. So initially I was just packing on MicroMDM, but when people started using it, we started using it for setting up Monkey and install application. And that was kind of like the thing we wanted because Apple was destroying imaging, so we needed a new workflow. But now we also need to start managing profiles that we can't manage with Chef or Puppet, because if the profile is not installed via MDM, then it's kind of useless. And Apple keeps adding more types of these profiles. I don't know if you were paying attention to WWDC this past couple of days, but they started locking down a lot of user-specific data. So your root account can't read a lot of these folders under library/mail and things like that, because those are specific to the user, location data, and all that. MDM will give you the right to install a profile that will give you some of those rights back if you really need them. But you need to install a profile with MDM. So MicroMDM could always install profiles, but as I mentioned, UDP management, you install a profile, you acknowledge, the device acknowledges and installed the profile. How do you know the profile is there a week later? Do you need to check every day? So we're trying to build a workflow around this. And so there's sort of a design thing that I've been hacking while I was flying to conferences the past months. And the way it kind of works is that rather than going and clicking on a device and saying this device needs these profiles, we're going to invert it a little bit, and we're going to say that this profile needs to be applied on this type of device. So there's this idea of like labels and selectors, and if you're familiar with Kubernetes, it kind of has the same idea of being able to apply key values to a device or something like that. So we can say that, if the device is iOS or the device is macOS is version 10, 14 or later, enforce this profile. So that's kind of the idea there. The other thing that's kind of hard, that's still an implementation detail or like something we're thinking of how to implement, is actually hashing the profile and checking that it's always the same. There's some reasons why it's hard. One of the main reasons why it's hard is that MicroMDM never wants to modify your payload. So if you use any other MDM, you kind of get a web interface where you go and you build a plist. Well, you're using a web form, but what happens is that gets generated a mobile config file that goes to the device. And MDMs have been known to go and mess with that data. So you never really know what's happening. MicroMDM, at least at the core level, doesn't care what's in the payload, just care that you gave it some bytes. It doesn't even care if it's signed. So all of that is considered higher level things that you can do. And so we're kind of playing with this in the workloads, but want to maintain this idea that if you give us a profile, we'll never modify it. So anyway, this is going to be my Hack Night project. Hopefully it'll be there, not in the next version, but in the version after that. Yep. I want to show you a little demo. I mentioned a few other things. How am I doing with time? Okay. Yep. So if I shift this, I'll just mirror things now. This place. Oh, trying to say this is hard. Oh, okay. Perfect. So I will do a demo, but before I jump into that, I want to show you a few pre-recorded things that I've done. So the first one is, I mentioned that I can unenroll a device. This is kind of what it looks like with the API. So we use MDMCTL, which is also inspired by Kubernetes, The idea is that you have a command line tool that you're using to manage your server, and it'll declaratively apply certain things. In this case, we take the UDID of the device, and we're applying something we're calling a block. I'm exploring, there's an issue asking for also blocking serial numbers and blocking device models and device versions, because you might want to force to unenroll something because of a security thing, or anyway. Right now it's just UDIDs, but I can apply this block, and then what happens, if you're paying attention to the VM there, the MDM got unenrolled, and this is a DEP device. So I can run the profiles command, get the DEP notification, go, enroll, and it'll enroll, and then it'll go away again. Because that block, the way this feature works is that it will block when you send a APNS notification to the device will check in with the server, and the server will actually say unenroll right now. Otherwise, the device doesn't talk to you. So this is kind of how this is built. So I can, just like I applied, I can also remove the block, and it's the same command. And it goes and it gets removed. So now I can enroll, and everything will be fine. It'll be interesting to see if I can add the ability to query which devices were blocked and by whom. Auditing is kind of not a big thing right now. But yeah, okay. So that was one little demo that I had. And I have another one, and specifically around API commands. So before I do that, one of the things that everything in MicroMDM is an API, but that doesn't mean it's a documented API. So I found that the easiest way to actually document the API is to go and write some curl requests, because then you can go and translate those into something else. So I have a little README here of how it works, and there's a few examples of commands and things. So sending a push notification to a device, if you want to do one, it takes the path for environment variables, and that's basically this API token for talking to the server. So it curls to the server URL to the push endpoint, and it takes a device UDID. So that's one example. There's commands here for going in and locking a device. So that takes a request of device lock and a UDID and a PIN. And who here is familiar with JQ or has used JQ in the past? Okay, so JQ is a tool for manipulating JSON, and it's actually really neat. So one of the things, if you're sending JSON to a server with Bash, you're going to do a lot of string escaping. JQ lets you not do that by doing something like this, where I can say .foo equals false, and it'll translate that to valid JSON with all the things. Yeah, okay, that's better. So I can do that, and I can also insert a pipe, and then that bar equals 1. So now it goes and it adds things. So this is how this works, is that it takes a few arguments. There's a request type, a UDID, and a PIN, which I'll come back to in a little bit. But it basically builds that JSON, and then it curls it to the server. The server goes and does this. So now that you know how this works, you can write it in Python and go and do it yourself. And the documentation for the API is coming at some point, and it will be like a Swagger generated thing, but this is what you get now. So now my second demo that explores this idea a little bit. So I have this profile called Disabled Theory from Rich's GitHub, and it's a profile that's supposed to disable Siri. So there's a few commands I already added there. We'll try to add one together today. But yeah, so I say install profile, then I specify the device UDID, and then I specify the path to that profile. And that'll get sent to the server. So you get this request type, install profile, the whole JSON thing. The profile is installed. So Siri is blocked now, right? Can't use it. Great. Yep. So I can come back and it has MDM has a remove profile. This is, by the way, what really bugs me about MDM. I don't know if it bugs you guys, but to install a profile, I have to send an install profile command. To remove a profile, I have to send a remove profile command. If I have, 1,000 devices, I have to do that for each. Why can't I just say that I want this profile to exist or not exist and do it? Like, that's what Monkey does, right? That's why we all use it. Where it's like, you want this to be a managed install or an optional install? Yeah, so this is not great, but it's what we're stuck with. But it works. So you remove a profile, it gets removed. You can enable Siri. Doesn't work on VMware, but it's still there. Cool. So that's my second demo. And then there's another example there where I can send a restart device command, and it basically works the same way. They all take all of these examples take UDID as the first argument, because you need to send the payload to a specific device. So, yep, I click restart device. A second later or so, that device gets restarted. So I showed you a few examples. I showed you where they are. So let's see where they're here, right? So we did install profile. That takes, once again, the endpoint is specified and takes the request type as install profile. The UDID is the first argument that gets piped into the JSON request. And the third one is the payload, which if you read the documentation, it's a base64 encoded mobile config. That's what Apple wants you to send. That goes to the endpoint. So yeah, there's examples here, but it's not complete. MDM actually has today 52, 53 commands. So how do you go about writing your own? Like, how do you go about putting that as a pull request so other people don't have to? Let me show you. So Apple has this document, which used to be a PDF that you had to pay $300 a year to get access to. Now it just lives on the web. So this is this PDF. It was updated a few days ago, and it says, important, this document is no longer being updated. And you go and you click on the documentation website. So we saw this, and there's a few people at WWDC, and they're supposed to ask, like, where are you supposed to get to? Because that link doesn't actually go anywhere. It's just, yeah. So that's the response that we got immediately on Twitter from people who know better than us that this shouldn't be here. But it's here today, so this is what you're supposed to use. Yep, on developer website, there's this document and describes how MDM works. If you want to write your own, go read this document. If you're using JAMP, if you're using any other MDM, go read this document, because when you're complaining about things not working, you should really know whether it's Apple's fault or somebody else's fault, and this document will describe that best. So for troubleshooting, it's great. For working with MicroMDM and on documented APIs, it's also great, because like there's a thing here about request types. So if you want to write a request for MicroMDM to create this JSON blob that I described, you can just read the documentation here. And so let's look at install profile. Since we just installed the profile, we'll need an example. So the install profile command installs a configuration profile. It has this request type string, all the payloads do, and then it has the payload. And the payload just says data. Whenever you see data, it's base64 encoded, whatever. A remove profile, request type remove profile, takes the payload identifier. So if you're looking at the XML, the identifier for that profile is disable Siri, which is what we used. So yeah, let's write a command. I think erase device would be good. So the request type is erase device. We keep calling it device wipe because there's also device lock, but actually it's erase device. And there's a pin. So I never really understood what the pin is for until I actually wiped the device. I still don't understand what it's for, but now I know where it goes. And then for iOS, they have preserve data plan and disallow proximity setup. So yeah, but those are optional, so we don't need them. So we just need the request type and the pin. So if we look at device lock, it's actually exactly the same with like a message and phone number, but it's a request type, device lock, and a string that's a pin. So if I go to commands here, we already have a device lock, and that's the request type, the UDID, and the pin. So when I said let's write one, I mean let's copy one. Tools API commands device lock. Tools API commands device wait. Let's do that. Tools API. I can just look here. Cool. So the only thing that's going to change here is that this should say erase device. Yep. So, JQ is going to take erase device, the UDID, the pin. It's going to create the JSON. I'll show you what this is, and then the server URL and the endpoint. So if I look at tools Eggrock, that's my env pass. So that just has the API token and the server URL. And for this, I'm using Eggrock. So the server URL is this. By the way, Eggrock is really neat. I have this other document so when I was building, for about 2 years of working with MicroMDM, I had a DigitalOcean server where I would install MicroMDM and kind of like work there. And then I was like, I'll just use Eggrock. And so I wrote a document of how I'm using it. And it takes about, if you already have a DP account and an ability to get an MDM server cert, it takes about 5 minutes to read through this and get a local MDM server working. Eggrock is free for up to 8 hours, and then like the server restarts and the URL changes. So there's a few helpful scripts to like run it for an 8-hour session. Obviously not for production, but for your laptop. So it's running, exposing an 80. Oh, and it also like gives you all the TLS certs, so you don't have to like go and figure out how to do that part. You just need to read this. So yeah, I'm using this. The reason this is really great is because I can go in my browser to 4040, and it actually, like, all the requests that I do, like, it shows everything that I did. So this is another great way to learn about stuff. So if I send a push notification right now, let's see what happens. Tools API, send push notification. I need the UDID, right? So did I have it somewhere before? Yep. Bear with me. Yep. Okay. So that's the UDID of this Mac, supposedly. Okay, so that's success. That went to APNS. MicroMDM got it. That came here. I'm not seeing the device connect, so I'm not sure if my demo is going to work. Let's try it anyway. Am I enrolled in MDM? Important thing to check. Nope, I'm not. So let's enroll in MDM. Profiles-n. That makes the notification pop up.
You do have a serve on.
I do? I don't think I do.
That's right.
Thank you, Sam. Wow. Yeah. So that's actually something that Eric Gomez discovered when he was trying to push out DP on his fleet, is that if you have DND installed, like, your devices will never DP enroll. Device enrollment, cool. So it says that Collide wants to manage my Mac. Do I want to allow it? Sure. it'll install. So while that's installing, and it does work on 10.14 because I fixed the bug last night. I think. Okay. While that's happening, so what's happening here? I said you can see all the requests. So it does a post request to Unenroll, and the device responds back with an enrollment profile, which contains a SCEP profile and a few other things. It's all justplists. This is not working. This will time out. I blame the Wi-Fi. Yeah. But yeah, you can see everything that it does. So I'm supposed to be seeing that it's checking in, and that was working when I was in my seat. So is there a way to cancel this? I don't know. Apparently, I can do this. I tried. Yeah. Anyway.
Maybe it's a
I should have enrolled my device before I.
good time for a coffee break.
I think we're good. I think I just wanted to wipe the device and walk off. So that's all. If you guys have any questions, otherwise, thank you.